Welcome to the Whole Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you become a fat burner, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
It's Debbie Potts, and I'm doing a new episode that I've been looking forward to for the Whole Athlete Podcast, as we are talking to the microbiome specialist, Kiran from Megaspore, Probiotics, and more. So thank you so much for coming back on and sharing your knowledge. And as you're the expert in the microbiome, and I think the only one I ever hear about the most everywhere.
Everywhere, literally.
You're all over the place. So we just had an amazing webinar. You guys can go back. We'll put it in the show notes, the link to the webinar we did with slides that you have to watch. And I know I listened and watched a few times, and you can watch that like over and over and over again and pick up something new. So the information on the microbiome, especially we're trying to focus today on endurance athletes, is really essential to your performance and just overall health. So let's kind of talk about what you are finding is important information to share with athletes, the importance of their health of the microbiome.
Yeah, so there's many different aspects to it. When we're talking about the health of the microbiome, it impacts virtually everything that could be a issue in an athlete's life or performance or function, whether it's weight management, which is one thing a lot of athletes struggle with, which means we go on very strict diets and all that. You know, I don't know if I mentioned the last one, but I used to be a fairly competitive cyclist, and I trained with a lot of very competitive cyclists. I was on a cycling team with a lot of, Cat 1 pros, and these people are very, very weight conscious, and, you know, they weigh their food and they eat very specific diets, and it's difficult, you know, and a pound or two here and there, and that kind of sport makes a huge difference. And then, of course, we want to do all of that while maintaining health as well. We want to make sure our immune system is still functioning so we don't get sick before either a race or performance, or even during training, which negates training time. We want to recover better. Then ultimately, hopefully, most athletes have the global view of being healthy as well, you know, beyond just looking a certain way or performing a certain way. We want to make sure all of this stuff that people are doing that is sport related is somehow improving and helping them with their overall health as well. And there's lots of science to show that being athletic in a certain way, of course, unless you're going to the extremes, can have long-term health benefits as well. So we're keeping all that in mind, balancing your hormones, balancing sleep, stress, anxiety, all of those things come into play as we start talking about the role of the microbiome in the life of an athlete. It is really the command center for everything that's going on in that person's life, whether it's their weight they're concerned about, their sugar metabolism, their performance, are they burning fat, are they requiring too much carbohydrates for whatever they're doing, are they recovering slow, are they not seeing gains on their musculature, are they getting sick too often, are they having too many loose bowels, or are they too stressed, are they too anxious, are they having depression? Yeah. All of those things come from that central command center, which is the microbiome. So it's paramount to their life and their performance.
That's what I try to stress when I'm writing blogs and talking on podcasts about longevity is, yes, we want to improve our performance, but the overall goal should be what's after that, or it's the rest of our life, because, you know, we want to keep active and healthy. So even if we're training for a race this year, 30 years, 40 years from now, what are we going to be doing? And do we want to still be active when you're 80 years old and still be able to travel the world and go play and, you know, not have to suffer because of what you're doing now?
Absolutely. And the thing is, a lot of athletes put so much into what they're doing now that is sport related. You want to make sure that all the effort you're putting in right now is not going to hinder you later on in life, but instead be a huge advantage to you later on in life. So being
Yeah.
a healthy athlete is really the key, because you can have great performance without having health, right? So they don't go hand in hand. The best performing athletes aren't the healthiest ones, and so that is something that's really important. And a lot of people that you're talking to on your show are not professional athletes necessarily. Their livelihoods aren't dependent on their performance, right? They are passionate people who have always been athletic, who are always passionate about a particular sport or two, and the performance is important to them, but they should have the number one focus of being healthy.
And that's why I love to focus on chronic stress and performance, because we're athletes training at, trying to be competitive age group athlete for some of us, while we still have a full-time job, a family. It's so different than training at a level that a professional athlete does. They get to take, train and then go nap and rest and get a massage and recover, repair, and then train again and get more sleep. And I think that's where we always push the envelope as the type A athlete, and trying to, what I wrote in my book, life is not a race, that we're trying to do too much every day. So I think looking at our health to improve our, as I say, my tagline all the time, burn fat, optimize health, so longevity and performance in your sport. So probably let's kind of break that up and talk about how does their microbiome impact our ability to lose weight, because that's probably the biggest concern of most people that listen.
Yeah. So in fact, as it turns out, the microbiome is the linchpin on whether or not you remain lean or you struggle with weight. And this started about 10 years ago. It started with studies on identical twins, who one of the twins was overweight, the other one was not. Right? One was lean, one was overweight. Now, what's interesting there is that identical twins have 100% the same genetics. They were raised in basically the same environment, the same household. So all of those other extrinsic factors that may contribute to weight are all the same for them. So then the question is, why is it one twin is obese and the other twin is not? So then they started suspecting the microbiome. So then one of the first experiments that they did was they took a set of normal mice who were fed a very particular diet, and this diet was standard across the board for all the mice. The mice were split into two groups. They would take stool. They would give the mice all antibiotics and bring down their natural microbiome, and then take the microbiome from the obese twin and implant it into half the mice, and then take the microbiome from the lean twin and implanted the other half of the mice. The mice that got the obese twin's microbiome ended up getting overweight, versus the lean twin's microbiome stayed lean, even though they're eating the same stuff.
Wow.
Right? So the diet didn't matter. And so they started with that. And then now here's the crazy thing. They could switch it. So then they could take the mice now that are obese and, wipe down its microbiome, take the microbiome from the lean mouse and put it into that mouse, and it stays lean. Or it starts to lose weight and stays lean. Wow. And vice versa. So they've done all variations of these experiments. There's also reported cases in humans who have undergone fecal transplants for other conditions like C. diff or colitis. Mm-hmm. And what they find is that if the donor was overweight, this new recipient now is struggling with weight, whereas they never struggled with weight before. Right? So the microbiome, those were some of the early studies 10 years ago that showed that the microbiome played a significant role in how your body looks and how your body responds to food. Then, since then, we've dug into a lot more mechanisms. In fact, we are doing a weight loss study as well, which I'll talk to you about, which is actually completed now, which is kind of exciting. And so what they found out is that there's certain microbes within the microbiome that protect against metabolic syndrome or cardiometabolic syndrome. Basically protects against everything under the whole metabolic syndrome umbrella. There's a particular type of bacteria called Akkermansia muciniphila. Akkermansia muciniphila is inversely correlated to weight, diabetes, and everything that falls under cardiometabolic syndrome. So people that tend to struggle with weight, people that tend to put on weight easier, have a really hard time losing weight, tend to have low levels of akkermansia. People that are that naturally lean people, you know, the annoying people that we all talk about that can eat whatever they want, never gain weight, right? We used to say they have a high metabolism. Well, it's way more than that. They actually have high levels of Akkermansia muciniphila and certain types of bifidobacteria as well. Now, the reason why those types of bacteria can actually protect them against weight issues is because of the metabolites that they produce. Number one, those people tend to have better appetite suppression. People that tend to be lean all their lives, the ones that are naturally lean, you know, they'll often say, oh, I just eat whatever I want. I never really gain weight. And they do. They'll eat donuts and they eat muffins and they eat all that. But how much they eat is a huge impact. The reason for that is their satiety signals work really well. Like I see that in my kids. You know, my kids are fascinating studies of diet because they want the worst things in the world all the time, right? And they hate the good stuff. But they're lean, they're very active, they're very, you know, they have boundless energy. And even if you give them their most favorite food in the world, ice cream or cupcake, if they're feeling full, they won't touch it. You know, or if you give them ice cream and it's, you know, more than they want or more than their body needs, they'll eat a portion of it and push it away. Yeah. You know, as adults, we can't do that.
Is that leptin and ghrelin related hormones?
That's absolutely leptin and ghrelin, right? So ghrelin is a hunger hormone. Ghrelin surges when you're hungry, and that's your impetus to go out and eat. Of course, early humans needed that impetus because it was so much harder to go get food. So, you know, it wasn't a matter of just opening the fridge. They had to go hunt for something, gather something, or cultivate something. And so that impetus is a very strong biological drive. But also once you get food, there should be almost an equally strong drive to stop eating. And that's a function of leptin, right? So ghrelin is high when you're hungry, leptin is really low. After you eat, ghrelin is supposed to drop and leptin levels go up. Yeah. Now, how does this happen? That's controlled almost 100% by bacteria. That's not controlled by us at all.
Is that genetics in there? You're not influenced?
There may be a genetic component for certain people that have certain receptor dysfunctions, but that is relatively rare compared to the number of people that struggle with weight issues. It's really a microbiome talking to your brain issue. So I'll give you an example of ghrelin. We published a study in 2017, and these were on these are healthy, what we consider healthy normals in the FDA eyes. You know, none of them were obese. Some of them, their BMIs were going up closer to 28, 29. Not to say that they're obese at all, but they had some weight on them. But for the most part, they were all normal body weight, normal constitution, young individuals. We were testing their ghrelin response as part of the study to a high caloric meal. So we had them coming in fasting. So they would be fasted 10 to 12 hours. We would take the baseline ghrelin levels when they're fasted, which showed ghrelin levels to be high, right? Which is normal. That's what you would expect. Then we'd give them a 2,000 calorie meal. And over the next 3 and 5 hours, we're measuring the ghrelin levels. And the ghrelin levels stay almost as high as when they were fasting. You know, so there's no communication between their gut that is seeing all the food coming in, telling their brain, hey, you have enough food, stop producing the hunger hormone. This person doesn't need to eat anymore. So then we gave them a probiotic, the Megaspore probiotic, for 30 days. Those same individuals, when they came in 30 days later, we did the same test. They came in fasted. What was interesting is even under fasted state, the ghrelin levels were lower than when they were previously in a fasted state. So the ghrelin response is already a little bit lowered. Then when we give them the 2,000 calorie meal, the ghrelin levels drop by almost 50%. So the probiotic, because of the way it's modulating the microbiome, and I'll talk about how it's modulating it, is now increasing that communication between the gut and the brain that says, hey, plenty of calories are coming in, stop producing the hunger hormone, right? And so we suspected that the probiotic that we're working with, the Megaspore, is actually enhancing Akkermansia and bifidobacteria levels, because that communication between the gut and the brain is the responsibility of Akkermansia and 1 or 2 bifidobacteria strains. And so we did a separate study, and we saw that in 3 weeks, we're increasing those bacteria by almost 100-fold. Wow. By adding in the spores. So now it makes sense why we're seeing that response. Now let's talk about leptin. Now ghrelin is supposed to go down and leptin is supposed to go up, because leptin not only does it improve satiety, makes you not want to eat anymore, it also triggers your cells to start taking in sugars and fats and start burning them. And in fact, it can stimulate all of the cells in your body to start burning fat.
Wow.
Right. So it creates a condition in your body where your gut sees leptin go up, and then signals are sent to the rest of the cells in your body. We're talking all of your skeletal muscle cells, your dermal cells, neurological cells, everything, where the signal goes out and goes, hey, we've got a lot of energy coming in, burn fat, and it pushes that message out, right? So how is leptin triggered? Well, there are bacteria in your gut that make short-chain fatty acids, in particular butyrate. Yeah. Butyrate floats around and sits on receptors called G-protein couple receptors. GPR, they stand for. If anyone ever wants to nerd out on understanding metabolism, start reading about GPR proteins. So in particular, GPR41 and GPR43 are really important. So these G-protein couple receptors are not only found on fat cells, but they're also found on the intestinal lining, right? So when these fat cell protein receptors and the intestinal lining receptors are bound by butyrate, they start to trigger this fat burning mode, and they start to release the production of leptin. So what's interesting is, where does this butyrate come from? Where it comes from Akkermansia. It comes from feculum bacteria and all these important bacteria in your gut that produce this compound for you that increases leptin expression and triggers your whole body to burn fat.
Wow. So is the vagal nerve involved in that too at all? It's the communication to the brain?
Yeah, so vagal nerve is involved in appetite suppression. Right. So that, and again, the vagal nerve is the conduit in which they send these signals to the brain. So if you have vagal nerve dysfunction, the messages aren't going to get there, even if you have a healthy microbiome. So toning and strengthening the vagal nerve is really important as well. So and that becomes an important part.
Side random comment, just someone that I know just had a heart transplant, and they cut their vagal nerve to put the heart in. So I was fascinated. I just heard this yesterday. I go, how's your digestion? And it'd be interesting to see what happens if that nerve, how do you reconnect and rebuild that vagal nerve? So side conversation, but just fascinating.
Yeah, that'll be
what happens.
Yeah, what happens? And there's another important hormone called adiponectin. Right, so adiponectin is a major fat burning hormone, and again, adiponectin is stimulated by short chain fatty acids. Adiponectin, when short chain fatty acids bind the receptors that release adiponectin, then the adiponectin manages cellular energy throughout the rest of your body as well. So the adiponectin goes in and starts telling all your cells, hey, we've got a lot of stuff coming in, start burning energy. Oh, you have all this stored fat, you don't need it, start burning it off for fuel, because we've got plenty of stuff coming in. And so all of those things, which are the things that are most important to us, even as an athlete, because one of the things I did in my last few years of cycling much more actively, I haven't done it in a couple of years because I've been traveling so much, so I haven't been able to be competitive. But my focus on the last few years when I was racing, when I was training, was to do it all in a fasted state. You know, I would wake up in the morning at 6, 7 in the morning, having fasted already for almost 10 or 11 hours. And then I would do 100, 120 mile competitive bike rides for 4.5, 5 hours, all completely fasted.
Wow, that's a long ride.
It's long rides, and I never took carbohydrates with me. I never took gel packs. I only took some electrolytes and water.
Yeah.
And that was my whole kind of training of your system and testing the microbiome to see if I can tap into fat just as well as anyone else who would take a carbohydrate shot to tap into the sugar for energy. And I actually found that I could go much longer and much more intensely if I was utilizing fat more efficiently, because I have 30 days worth of fat energy stored on my body. Every person, even if they're lean, even if they only have 10% body fat, you've got 27, 28 days worth of energy stored as body fat on your system.
Yeah.
But again, to utilize all of that, it's 100% dependent on the microbiome.
Wow.
Right. And one of the big mistakes we make as athletes is kind of skewing our macromolecules in our diet, because all of these bacteria that I talked about that are so important for ghrelin function, leptin function, stimulating system-wide fat burn, improving satiety, all of those are carbohydrate dependent bacteria. And when I say carbohydrate, I don't mean sugars. I mean long-chain carbohydrates, so fibers, prebiotics, resistant starches, things that you find in vegetables, in roots and tubers. Yeah, exactly. And we end up, athletes are obsessed with eating lots of protein. And the problem with that is the high intake of protein will cause a dysbiosis, and it'll actually reduce the growth of those types of really important bacteria. It increases Prevotella and other bacteria that can cause more inflammation if you present your body in the right situation, but it reduces the Akkermansia, the Bifidobacteria, and the Fecalin bacteria.
So a lot of athletes are following the big trend right now of keto, and we've always talked low carb high fat, which works for me, and I do fasted workouts and I don't need to eat a lot. But maybe some people, you're saying, might be not eating enough carbohydrates to get their body to burn fat, but it's that specific type of carbohydrate. So some people might be doing keto, which I find a lot of people can't digest that much fat if they have digestion issues, but you're speaking on the microbiome may not have that good mix of bacteria that will help you burn fat.
Yeah, and what's important to note is that when we say low carb, high fat, what people really mean is low sugar, right?
Yes.
Or no sugar. We don't mean low plants.
Yes.
Right? I don't think. Yeah, anyone that is educated and a proponent of keto would say, dramatically cut down your vegetable intake and just eat fat all day, right? Mm-hmm. But that's where the person that doesn't quite understand the distinction gets stuck, because I've talked to so many people who have done the low carb, high fat, but the way they're doing it is they're eating predominantly fat, 90% of it fat. They won't eat a potato or a sweet potato. They won't eat, a root vegetable, because they're like, that's carbs, and I'm not supposed to eat carbs. I instead of this, I'm just going to eat this big glob of butter, and that actually has damaging effects on the microbiome over time. So it's important to clarify that low carb, high fat means low to no sugar, lots of vegetables, and a higher amount of fat than the average individual would take in. And in fact, if the fat part of it is really helping with your inflammation and things like that, that's great. But you don't necessarily need fat to trigger your body to burn fat. That's the important distinction, because the triggers for fat burning come from the production of short-chain fatty acids. And short-chain fatty acids are produced by certain bacteria in your gut breaking down resistant starches and fibers.
So those are those plant-based vegetables that we want to include that feed our gut bacteria that create the butyrate.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the most important things. Now, if you can't include that many plants and all of that, we created the total gut restoration system to achieve all of that. And we finished, we completed 2 trials that we just submitted for publication, where we created a specific type of prebiotic, an oligosaccharide-based prebiotic, that when added to the probiotic, they become what we call a symbiotic. And basically the idea of a symbiotic is you have a probiotic that creates certain beneficial effects, and you have to design a prebiotic that enhances all of those effects of the probiotics. Mm-hmm. If you create a prebiotic that comes in and feeds other bacteria that have antagonistic functions, then you're not really creating a true symbiotic. So when you're doing a prebiotic-probiotic combination, it's really important that that's been verified and validated to be a symbiotic. Right? So a lot of times what you get is you'll get people that are taking a probiotic of some sort and they go, oh, I need prebiotics, and they go online and they find some prebiotic product from some company, but you don't really know if those two together are synergistic to create what we call a symbiotic. They could be antagonistic, right? If this prebiotic is feeding a particular type of bacteria more than any others, and your probiotic has a different type of bacteria and they have antagonistic functions, then you're going to cancel them out or even cause an issue. So our whole goal was, how do we simulate the whole idea of the ancestral diet of eating lots of roots and tubers, and eating lots of resistant starches, and getting lots of what we call oligosaccharides, and then also getting the environmental bacteria in, because a combination of those two is the most potent way of increasing those really important strains like Akkermansia, Faecalibacteria, Bifidobacteria, and certain types of lactobacillus. Because there are also lactobacilli within your gut that produce CLA. Right, most people are familiar with CLA, the conjugated linoleic acids, that have been very popular in the industry as a potent fat burner. But CLA is naturally produced in your gut at even higher levels if you have the right type of bacteria. That's another way your microbiome keeps you lean. Right, so
truth bombs left and right here. Truth bombs.
Exactly, and so you don't really need a lot of that stuff. If you have the right microbiome, you will be that person that has that constitution where they say, I can eat whatever I want, never gain weight. And what's true about them is a couple of things. One is, yes, they do eat whatever they want, but they eat very small portions, typically, right? Because their leptin and ghrelin function works really well. So they know when to put stuff away when they don't need it. And I see that like with my wife herself. She's naturally lean and always has been. Half her family is naturally lean. The other half, there's some people that struggle with weight, but their genetics are almost the same. But in her case, she's naturally lean. She loves to eat as many variety of things as I do, including the things you shouldn't be eating, like the desserts and all that. But she knows when to stop. That's the part that I came in. If we share a dessert, I'm going to eat 80% of it. And she's going to be so happy eating 20% and can push it away.
Yeah.
And that's different, right? That's it.
Those people that can take 1 or 2 bites and they're good.
And they're good, and in fact, it doesn't take a lot. Like, if you have your audience just do this experiment, it's just a simple thing, right? Don't eat until you feel those hunger pangs, right? Even wait till you get like famish type of hungry, right? Which we all, if you do intermittent fasting, you know what that feeling is like. It's typically towards the end of your fast. Now, you'll find that really strong, famish, hungry feeling is completely quenched with 2 or 3 bites of food. It's not like, and we eat well through that signal, right? So what you'll find is that portion out small bites of food. So maybe I've tried this on myself, like a small handful of nuts, a half a banana, and a little something to drink. And then I'll set that out and I'll go, okay, that's what I'm going to break my fast with and see how I feel. Right. And then when it's time to break my fast, then I just go right to that. I eat a small handful of nuts, half a banana, and drink some water. And because I'm not allowing myself to eat anything else for science purposes, I actually noticed that, wait a minute, I'm not hungry at all anymore. Right. That whole drive to eat is gone. And then if I go back to just doing whatever I was doing before I was ready to break my fast, I find that I won't get hungry again actually for another couple of hours. But what we do, even people that intermittent fast, one of the ways they screw it up is they've been fasting, and they're so famished in their mind, they have a plan of what all they're going to eat.
Yeah.
Right? They don't need all that stuff, but it's just your way of rewarding yourself for going through this fasting.
And then binge.
Yeah, and then you go binging crazy. And believe me, I've done it myself. Because you're trying to reward yourself, right? And another thing that occurs when you eat, which is really important, and your microbiome controls this, is dopamine is released, right? And the reason for that is your old evolutionary body wanted to reward you for being adventurous and going out and finding food. And that becomes one of the fundamental things that we need to do, because we use food as a trigger for this dopamine response. It's a reward center in your brain. Now, people who have a lot of weight issues use food excessively to get that stimulation, right? And so, like chocolate can do it. And that's why the whole idea of, if you're stressed or, and all that, eat a piece of chocolate and you actually feel better. So that's the idea, is that what we really need is to be mindful of feeding these types of key bacteria that are designed to control our metabolism and every aspect of our metabolism. Not just a single part of it, every aspect of it. And then as long as you're feeding those microbes, the rest of it will go well. You can increase your fat intake to be more keto-ish. That's great, especially if it helps you with your inflammation. As long as your gut's not leaky, you want to make sure that your gut is not leaky. And again, the probiotics resolve that. But if you have a hard time going to the store and parsing out roots and tubers and making sure you're getting enough resistant starches and oligosaccharides, that's why we created the prebiotic for you. So what we saw was, when we combined the prebiotic and probiotic, so the prebiotic is called Mega Prebiotic with the probiotic that people might know about already, the Megaspore biotic. We saw in 3 weeks, when you combine the two, you increase Akkermansia growth by over 100-fold. And you increase fecalum bacteria by 100-fold. So we're not talking about, doubling, tripling, or quadrupling. We're talking about 100-fold increase in this pro-lean bacteria that is one of the main controlling mechanisms for staying lean in your body. Now, incidentally, Akkermansia also protects against diabetes and everything against metabolic syndrome. So again, it's not about just how you look. It's one of those things that increases your health. Fecalum bacteria prosnitzi, we saw about a 10 to 100-fold increase in that. Fecalum bacteria prosnitzi is one of the most protective bacteria against anything inflammatory in the bowel, including Crohn's, colitis, colorectal cancer, and so on. Lots of studies on how high fecalum bacteria prosnitzi protects against all of those dysfunctions. So it's a really, really important microbe, because it also helps your gut seal up the leakiness in the gut.
And that's the Megaspore biotic.
That's a Megaspore. But then, so when you add Megaspore alone, we see about a 10-fold increase in fecalum bacteria prosnitzi. But then when you come in and add the prebiotic, it goes to a 100-fold increase.
Got it.
When you add Megaspore alone, we see about an 8 to 10-fold increase in Akkermansia. But when you bring in the prebiotic, it goes to 100. Same thing with Bifidobacter adolescentis, Bifidobacter longum, all of these really important bifidobacteria that make short-chain fatty acids and increase leptin, adiponectin function, allow you to remain lean. All of those microbes are increased dramatically with the spores themselves. And when you bring in the prebiotic, it significantly increases the response. So the way we do it with the total gut restoration to help people regain a control of the gut environment and increase these really important protective strains is you start with a probiotic for 4 weeks, the Megaspore itself. It starts to make all of the fundamental changes that you need to see in the gut, meaning higher Akkermansia, higher fecalum bacteria, higher bifidobacteria, lower levels of pathogens, and so on. And then after the 4 weeks, you bring in the prebiotic to add on. So you stay on the probiotic for the next 4 weeks. weeks, but you bring in a prebiotic in the next 4 weeks, and you do the two of them together for 4 weeks. And that gives you a huge boost in all of these microbes and short-chain fatty acids that I talked about. We see about a 38 to 48% increase with just the Megaspore. When you bring in the prebiotic in the second month, that increase goes to about 150% increase in butyrate.
Now,
right?
When do you take that? Do you take the Megaspore at nighttime, and then the prebiotic is a drink mix? You mix it with water, and then what's the best time of day to have that? And think about if you're intermittent fasting, you don't want to break your fast because it does have some food in it. So talk about that.
Yeah. So I usually, what I do is I take it with any of your meals of your day. So the probiotic, it doesn't have to be any particular time of day, as long as you're taking it with food. So it can be your first meal, your second meal, third meal, it doesn't matter. So you take it with food. And then the prebiotic, the way I do it is, in fact, I have it here in this. I just broke my fast maybe an hour ago.
How long did you fast for?
On average, I go at least 16, 17 hours.
Yeah.
And if I'm not, because I've been doing it for so long, if I'm not conscious of it, I'll accidentally go 20 hours because I'm tied up and stuff, and body's not really asking for food, right? And so sometimes I'll go, oh crap, I gotta eat. But today I have a really particularly long day. So what I did is I just mix it up in something like this, and I just drink it throughout the day. You don't have to mix it once and just drink the whole thing at once. I shot it. In fact, it works better in some ways if you drink it throughout the day. So when I'm ready to break my fast, I mix one of these up, and then this becomes my drink for the next 4 or 5 hours. With whatever I'm eating, I'm just drinking that. So I'm getting small amounts of the prebiotic in, and there are some studies that show when you parse in fibers of prebiotics in small amounts, you actually get better utilization of all of it. For example, if you take, let's say, 5 grams of a fiber of prebiotic and take it all at once, your microbiome might only utilize 60, 70% of it. A lot of it might not get utilized at all. There's too much there at once. And it just, there isn't enough time through the process of metabolism to get used up. But if you take small amounts, you utilize more like 90 to 100% of it as you go along.
That makes sense, because I tend to just sometimes just take it all in. I was curious. I'm sure this is a little too much in my body to take these 10 different supplements and drinks all together.
And we make that mistake with protein too, right? We'll do a protein shake that has like 30, 40 grams of protein in it, and without understanding that our body can only actually utilize a certain amount of protein at any given sitting. So you're better off making a protein shake and kind of drinking it throughout the day to get better utilization of the amino acids, better absorption of the amino acids.
Yeah. So there's the total gut restoration program we're talking about. So you start with the Megaspore Probiotic for 1 month, and there's a schedule to start that every other day, then every day, and then 2 a day. And then after that month, you add in the prebiotic drink mix that you can have after you break your fast, because I know most of my clients I'm having them all do fasting. And then you drink that throughout the day, and then take your prebiotics during your meal. And then there's another product after that.
Yeah, and then the last part of it is called the Mega Mucosa. It's the tools that you give to your microbiome, your new healthy microbiome, to start repairing all the physiological damage that has occurred over years. So that's the mucosal structure that's so important. The mucosal structure is the conduit for conversation between the microbiome that is on the top layer and then your own intestinal cells, which is on the bottom layer. And most of that mucosal structure is supposed to be fairly sterile, meaning there shouldn't be a lot of bacteria in there, even your own commensal bacteria. But what happens over time with antibiotic use and being exposed to pesticides and having higher levels of pathogens and just having an incomplete diet without enough diversity promoting macronutrients, what you end up is getting that mucosal layer starting to break down, and it stops acting like a barrier. You get more and more bacteria translocating from the top part to the inner part of the mucosal barrier, right? And that causes systemic inflammation that starts in the gut. So that causes severe intestinal inflammation. Your body basically freaks out if you did a tree just fall down?
Well, something fell down. Sorry, people. We had a big snowstorm and it's all melting, and all these branches back here keep tree branches falling off.
I love your perseverance in the face of disaster going on all around you.
Trying to focus.
Exactly. Help people. So the idea is that this kind of physiological damage to the gut lining, the cells that make up the lining that are soldier cells kind of sitting shoulder to shoulder, and they're broken apart and stuff is leaking through. The mucosal structure is not functioning. The immune system in the mucosa is not functioning. So you're becoming more and more sensitive to more foods and more environmental things. All of that is a sign that your mucosal structure, where your immune system samples all the stuff that comes in from the outside, that stuff is not working.
It's like sealing your gut with glue.
Yeah, exactly. And when we talk about sealing the gut and we talk about the leakiness in the gut, there's really two parts to it. We often talk about the intestinal lining itself, our own cells, that we form gaps in between them that we shouldn't have, right? The tight junctions. Or even sometimes cells die and they get kicked off and there's a whole gap there with no cell. And so there's no barrier. But then we rarely talk about the mucosal structure, which is on top of it, which also acts like a barrier system. And typically that mucosal structure is broken down as well. And so having to repair all those structures, which is key to getting overall health, that's the biggest part of what you and I were talking about earlier, is how do we do what we do now to be athletes, but
the long term,
what we're doing, gives you the long-term health. This is the most important part, because a lot of the stuff that we do for athletics breaks down these structures. It breaks down the mucosa, it breaks down the intestinal epithelium. The stress of working out alone will do that. There's a study shows, and actually the military, the U.S. military has a major focus on leaky gut, because what they've shown is that when they take soldiers and put them through the high-intensity training in boot camp, that it creates significant leaky gut in those soldiers, and they have stuff leaking through all the time. That actually disrupts their HPA axis, their hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and that makes them much more susceptible to post-traumatic stress and other issues going to conflict zones, right? So the U.S. military themselves have a big focus on how do we stop leaky gut in soldiers, right? And this is the same thing that happens in athletes that do high-intensity training. High-intensity training leads to leaky gut, so we need to fix that. And that's where the mega mucosa comes in. So again, we cannot repair our own leaky guts. We count on bacteria to do that. The probiotic and the prebiotic combination for that first 2 months gives a dramatic increase to the types of bacteria that fix the leakiness in the gut. Now what we need to do is provide those bacteria with the tools that they need. So what's in that mega mucosa, that third part of the system, is 4 key amino acids. These amino acids are the major building block of that mucosal structure. So you could stimulate, signals to rebuild the mucosa, but if the building blocks aren't present at adequate amounts, your body can't rebuild the mucosal structure. So studies where they've experimentally damaged that mucosal structure in animals using a number of toxins, when they add in these 4 amino acids, the mucosal structure rebuilds by over 95%. So it's super important, and we're the only ones that I've seen that have found that research and have added these 4 key amino acids into a mucosal building product. The second part to it is a bovine IgG. These immunoglobulins are absolutely central to regenerating your mucosal structure. The reason for it is all of the inflammation in your gut occurs in the mucosa. right? And if there's continuous inflammation in the mucosa, it can't rebuild. The continuous inflammation will continue to damage the mucosa. The cells that's responsible for secreting the mucin to rebuild the mucosa, who are supposed to get the signals from the microbiome to do that, none of those things function well when there's inflammation going on. So this bovine IgG comes into the mucosa and starts neutralizing all of the things like mold toxins and bacterial toxins and viral toxins that continuously stimulate inflammation in the mucosa. And it allows the mucosa that time to rebuild. It also upregulates your own immune response against those things. So it's kind of training your immune system as well. The last part is a polyphenol. So polyphenols are going to be really important for microbiome health as we go along in research in the next few years. So we've seen lots of studies coming out showing that polyphenols are paramount to microbiome health. So we found this citrus polyphenol product that has good research, clinical trials behind it that show it significantly reduces the intestinal inflammation, allows for the rebuilding of the lining, and increases the diversity in the microbiome. So it becomes a really important tool in that rebuilding phase. So there's three parts to the total gut restoration. The first part, we call it reconditioning. That's with the probiotic. So the probiotic comes in, it basically changes the environment in your gut to favor the growth of more good bacteria and suppress the growth of the bad bacteria. So it's reconditioning the environment so that the ecological changes can happen. Then the second part is called reinforce. That is the prebiotic. It comes in and it reinforces all of these positive changes that the probiotic just started to make, right? And that's important because continuously we are exposed to forces that work against a balanced microbiome, right? You're eating food that's covered in herbicides and pesticides. We're all exposed to fluoride in the drinking water and chlorine and all of this stuff that works against a healthy microbiome. So even though the spores are in there starting to fix the microbiome, we want to reinforce those changes and make them more permanent with the prebiotic. So we've got recondition, reinforce. Then in the third month, once you've been on the probiotic and prebiotic together now for 4 weeks, you bring in the mucosal support product called Megamucosa, and that provides the microbiome, the new healthy microbiome, with the tools to start rebuilding all those structures. So for the last 4 weeks, you're on all three products at once. Now, again, the mucosa is also a powder drink product. So you can actually mix it into this with the prebiotic and just do a combination and just drink both of them, a scoop of each throughout the day.
I wondered that if you had to do it separately or you can just mix it all together and that wouldn't be too much.
Yeah, no, mix it all together and drink it slowly throughout the day. It's far better than making a single drink and trying to get it all in there. That'll be a little too much for your system.
Okay, good to know. So the information you can find all about this on the website. I want to give everyone the links, and we can put the links in the show notes as well with the code The Whole Athlete that you can learn more. Yeah,
so if they go to microbiomelabs.com, Microbiome Labs is spelled MICROBIOME. That's microbiome, and then labs with the S on it.com. Right up on the front page there's a whole explanation of the total gut restoration system. You'll also find several videos and webinars that I've done explaining the total gut restoration system. Now, here's why this is so important for athletes, because even though athletes, tend to have more active lifestyles and tend to be a little healthier than the average person, athletes are just as susceptible to chronic illness, right? The Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and heart disease and all of these things. You no longer have to be overweight and smoking and inactive to develop autoimmune conditions, to develop Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, because those things aren't necessarily conditions of just diet alone. They're also conditions of what's going on with your microbiome. So, that leakiness in the gut is a major driver of most of those conditions. And you can be a fit, lean, active athlete and still have significant leaky gut. right? And that's a really important understanding. We used to think that if we were really lean and we had a six-pack and we looked really fit, we could run fast and all that, we were perfectly healthy. And then it always surprised everyone when some athlete that looked really fit and lean ended up with cancer, ended up with heart disease, and conditions that we just didn't expect them to have. And that's because there's that underlying problem of that leakiness of the gut. And the whole idea of the total gut restoration is to fix that fundamental part, but it'll also help you with the issues of the weight management and so on that people are concerned about.
So do you find that people should do lab testing, or you just go by symptoms that we in nutritional therapy look at, or as I become functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, FDN, that they do mostly lab testing, look at things? Or do you just look at, like, I don't feel good, I have all these symptoms listed, I'm just going to start taking these products?
Yeah, I mean, if you're on the path of investigating a particular issue that you're dealing with, like let's say you have severe anxiety and you think maybe it has mold toxin relatedness, or maybe it's heavy metal, maybe your candida issues that you're experiencing are heavy metal toxicity. So it's okay to do some tests to try to figure out what is the cause or driver. It's not necessarily a primary cause, because we know the primary cause of most of these conditions is a dysfunctional gut, right? So my suggestion is, if you're working with a practitioner and you're on the path to try to figure out drivers of your particular condition, do the tests and try to figure it out and boil it down to the things that you need to address or avoid. But at the end of the day, even if you find those, you got to fix the gut.
It always starts with the gut. All disease starts in the gut.
Absolutely. Like you might boil it down and find that you've got a niacin deficiency, and that's driving certain types of issues. That's driving triglyceride levels high. But then you supplement with niacin and it doesn't really improve. Well, the reason is because your gut is inflamed and dysfunctional and is not metabolizing the niacin. And then that's why you ended up in the deficiency in the first place. It wasn't because your intake of niacin was off. It was because you're not metabolizing, utilizing it, right? So that's the important distinction. It's okay to find out what the cause is, but at the end of the day, for any of the treatments to work well, you really need to fix the gut. And whether you're perfectly healthy, because the 2017 study we published was on healthy, normal individuals, right? So these are people with no chronic conditions, no diseases of any sort that they reported, for the most part, healthy normals. And we found that 55% of them had really severe leaky gut. 55%, right?
That's a lot.
And it's a lot. And that same 55%, every time they eat, their toxin levels in their body go way high, their inflammation goes way up. And even though they're healthy now because they're young, or they think they're healthy because they're young and their body's dealing with it, that's laying down the pathology for them in their 30s, 40s, and beyond to end up dealing with autoimmune diseases. Lupus all of a sudden comes on, Hashimoto's all of a sudden comes on, weight issues start to come on, all of those things because of that decade before, all of that constant leaky gut setting up that chronic inflammation. So whether you have conditions or not, and especially if you have conditions, you have to address the gut. Even if you don't have conditions, just from the fact that we live in a toxic world, and we've all had multiple courses of antibiotics, most of the food, even the organic food we eat, are covered with herbicides and pesticides. We need to fix the gut, right? We don't necessarily want to wait until something shows up and go, oh boy, I got to fix the gut now. Be preventative about it and fix your gut. Yes,
I've been using this product and implementing it into the holistic method program that I'm doing with clients and in groups, that I think it's so important to look at digestion and gut health. And then I'm learning more and became a DNA fit coach to really learn how to read those genetics that you can get from 23andMe and upload them into DNA Fit or sign up through them. And look, so much information, looking at Dr. Ben Lynch's Dirty Genes book and putting all this information together is what I've been just fascinated about. That's really, if you want to optimize your health and focus on, your future life, being active and traveling and having fun, I want to look at my gut health and make sure I'm doing the right thing for my genetics and really be able to just thrive and feel alive is what I keep finding myself saying.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's so important. It's fundamental. The reason why we even came up with this total gut restoration system was, over the last 5.5 years, we've been able to work with a lot of functional medicine docs. We have a very big client base in the whole integrative medicine, functional medicine space, and because we are a microbiome company. The most common questions we get is, how do you figure out what's wrong with an individual's gut, right? Imagine this scenario, whether you're you're a practitioner or a doctor with an office with a patient coming in. Imagine your first client or first patient comes in and they have Hashimoto's, thyroiditis. Your second patient comes in, doesn't have Hashimoto's or other known hormonal imbalances or autoimmune disease, but it has severe anxiety. And then the third patient comes in and they have, acne. Now, that all three of them, if you've studied the microbiome, you know that all three of them have the microbiome involved in all of their conditions, right? But the conditions are so different. And so how do you figure out what is wrong with each of their microbiome? And to be able to treat it effectively. And as it turns out, if you dig into the decades worth of microbiome research that's available, you find that no matter what those conditions are, whether it's the acne, it's the anxiety, it's the Hashimoto's, or it's a diabetes or obesity, they all have the same fundamental problem in the microbiome. They have low protective strains, so low keystone strains, like the Akkermansia we talked about, and Faecalibacter and Bifidum longum. These keystone strains are really important in protecting the host in many different ways. They have low diversity in the microbiome. They end up having really bad leaky gut, and they have chronic inflammation. And so, those basic dysfunctions are present in all of these different chronic diseases.
Yeah.
So our whole idea was, hey, doc, you don't have to try to figure out with each individual what is specifically wrong with them. Yeah. Here's the thing that's wrong with all of them, right? And this is how you fix it with a total gut restoration. So that's how it came about. And one note about diversity I should mention, because diversity in the microbiome is paramount to the health of the microbiome, right? And diversity is measured as the richness in the microbiome, meaning how many different organisms you actually have in your microbiome. And then it's also measured by uniformity. So it's not just having lots of different organisms, but 7 of them are really high and the rest of them are really low. That doesn't afford diversity. So you have to have richness and you have to have good uniformity of all the organisms as well. That's measured by something called a Simpson Reciprocal Index. Now, we did a study at the end of last year that we submitted at the end of last year for publication, that showed that when you add the spores in, you dramatically increase diversity in your microbiome by almost 35-40% in as little as 3 weeks. And then when you bring in the prebiotic after that, you increase it even further. So we're increasing those keystone strains, but we're also significantly increasing diversity in the microbiome. Now, the typical common question is, where did those organisms come from, right? Because we're increasing the diversity by 400 or 500 organisms. Yeah. Where did they come from? Well, they were always there. They were just at such low levels that they were just not functional and not even detectable by some of our most sensitive methodologies, because they were at such low levels. And so bringing in the reconditioning step of the probiotic starts reconditioning the environment so they can start to do well. And you reinforce those changes and they show up. Like we did assays on an individual's microbiome and we couldn't find Akkermansia. And then you add probiotic, and this is using qPCR, which is a very, very sensitive way of looking for particular bacteria. Then you add in the probiotic, and 3 weeks later, they have huge amounts of Akkermansia. Right? So it's not like Akkermansia came out of the blue. We didn't put Akkermansia in the probiotic. Yeah. The Akkermansia was there. It was at such a low level among the 100 trillion bacteria cells that are in there that we can't even pick it up.
Wow. You have an exciting job, just lots of new research every day.
Absolutely. We're doing 13 clinical trials right now, and this in itself is exemplary of how important fixing the microbiome is. So at the end of last year, we finished 2 clinical trials, one on lowering elevated triglycerides, another one on, it was a dermatology study. So we're looking at reducing acne lesions, increasing hydration in the skin, reducing wrinkle appearance, reducing inflammatory markers in the skin. And then right now we're doing a gingivitis study. We're doing a rheumatoid arthritis study. We're doing a C. diff study. So for people with Clostridium infections. So we're doing this huge variety of different things, all with the same product, right? So how can the same product help your gums, help your skin, help your knees, right? Help lower your triglycerides, all of that stuff. Well, the reason is we're making that fundamental fix in the microbiome. And when you do that, it has overall beneficial effects on the rest of your body. It's not that it's a miracle product and a snake oil kind of thing that impacts everything. It's just that we've found how to alter the true root cause of most of our dysfunctions.
Wow, that's so fascinating. I just love hearing all this information. As I said earlier, it's truth bombs. I mean, just to learn all this stuff, and I just drives me nuts listening to people going to their doctor to get some medication to treat acne, or, I had some clients talking about their kids that are high school, college age that are on metformin for blood sugar issues. Like, okay, wait, it's awful to hear what people are being given from their doctor who they trust in their health in their hands and for longevity. And, it's so great to get this message out to our listeners. Hopefully everyone can pass it along. Another tree branch just broke off and the snow is melting. So I just think it's so important for people to share this episode and share your link on YouTube. And I think we just need to pay it forward because, as you just said the last hour, all this very amazing, fascinating information that not many people know about. And I think we all need to help spread the mission of the importance of the microbiome and all the research you guys are doing at your company and spreading that around the world. So thank you so much for your passion and creating that impact in our world to help our health and performance.
Yeah, it's absolutely my pleasure. And then also, thank you so much for letting me talk about this, because none of this would mean anything if we couldn't get it out to the people.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk to you about this and get it out to your audience, because this is empowerment, right? Our best health is going to come from us advocating for ourselves.
Yeah.
And the only way we can effectively advocate for ourselves is to be empowered with education and empowered with the information. And so this kind of stuff is so important to do. And this is why I do probably too many of them, basically, if you talk to my family and friends. But it's so important to get this stuff out there, so people can live better lives as a community.
Well, that's
it. Right?
And that's why podcasts, I think, are so great, because they're free for people. And, I do this for free. We pay to do this. So I think it's just getting out this information, and this is really the main way to get the information out there is through podcasting. So, go to your YouTube channel and watch all your amazing short and informative videos, and, get more on listening and following you, because you keep sharing the new and updated research and your findings for your company.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I look forward to doing it again.
All right. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Whole Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at wholeathletepodcast.com. You can help us continue and grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and see you next time.